Welcome to Healthy Conflict, the podcast where we challenge the myth that conflict is bad. We believe conflict isn't the problem, it's how we handle it. Most of us avoid it, blow up during it, or freeze and retreat. But what if conflict could be a catalyst for deeper trust, better leadership, and more connected teams? For these first few weeks, we'll be exploring a variety of real world situations to help us all to turn tough conversations into transformative ones. Expect practical tools, honest stories, and a little bit of sage mode magic. Because the best leaders don't avoid conflict, they get good at it. I'm Rainey Martin, a business coach based in Montana. I'm speaking with Rasha Shaheen.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I'll introduce myself also. So, yeah, I'm Rasha. I'm an executive leadership coach, and I help founders reclaim their time by getting out of the weeds and ultimately growing cultures that lead themselves.
And welcome to the house members that have joined us, Michelle and Tony. Thank you for being here today. And feel free to make a comment in the chat or request to be able to speak if there's anything you'd like to add. Rasha, great to see you today, or hear you rather.
Good to
We've
hear.
been talking about healthy conflict and how to approach it to make to shift, right, to transform it into healthy conflict. And one thing that has been coming up for us is um, how to how to have both parties come out of a conflict feeling good about it without either one compromising their values or making the other person feel small, right?
Yeah,
And that
that's right.
and we're thinking that's how healthy, respectful conflict and resolution can actually happen. So one thing we've been talking about is language, right? How what's a good way to build trust with language?
Yeah, brilliant question. And if we're starting with language, I guess one idea is to not talk about the other person in a sense, like, like talk about yourself, talk about your feelings, talk about how it impacted you rather than what you think, like rather than assuming the other person did something with a particular intention, because you have no idea or you have no proof about their intention, but you do have proof about how the situation impacted you.
Yeah, yeah, and this is right a common piece of advice that you hear a lot, right? Use I statements. Keep it about you and your feeling, your experience. Don't assume intent of the other person, right? Um, but it turns out sometimes that even that, which seems like really easy, basic advice, can be really challenging, right? Like we were talking recently about an experience I had, right, where I felt attacked, right, in the situation. I felt attacked. I wanted to say to the other person, I felt attacked. But what happens when you say to someone, I felt attacked? They feel attacked, right?
Well, it depends. It depends, doesn't it? I wouldn't say like they would necessarily feel that they felt attacked. Is and this goes down to can I bring in my equation again?
Oh, love your equation.
Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So this idea of healthy conflict equals trust multiplied by, like, let's just open those imaginary brackets, courage, clarity, and I can't remember what the third one is. But the
Courage,
part
clarity, and curiosity.
That's it, curiosity, perfect. But the first one that we want to kind of talk about is the trust bit, the kind of like trust being the multiplier within all of this. And if there is kind of good trust between you two, between well, the people in conflict, then the other person might not necessarily feel attacked. Like, so like just to kind of like I remember a conflict that I had with a very, very good friend of mine, and she definitely she didn't accuse me. She told me how she was feeling, but I didn't react. I didn't take it personally. I just could see that she was going through something, and I think because of that level of trust, I didn't. I didn't feel attacked. So I didn't feel that her feeling attacked was an attack towards me.
I think that's a really interesting point, Rasha. I think you're right that when there's a certain level of trust between people, it's easier to not take things personally. It's easier to not react from the hip, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I also can think of some recent situations that I've been in where, in a couple of situations, I really had strong, well developed relationships with people and loved them a lot, and felt very, very safe with them, right? Psychological safety, that's another thing that we talk about, right?
Yeah.
And as a result, the interaction, even though it was painful and could have led to um, you know, things that might damage the relationship, it didn't, right? Because we
Yeah.
both actually were coming from a place of wanting to preserve the relationship and not wanting to hurt the other person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
then I had a different situation where that level of trust wasn't actually there, even though I've had interactions with this person for quite a long time, even more than a year. That basic feeling of I don't know. I guess psychological. It goes back to psychological safety, right? Wasn't there,
Mm.
and so it wasn't as easy to get
Mm.
to a place inside me where I want I want the best for the other person, right? I got mired in my feelings of hurt,
Mm.
right,
Mm.
right. So it's interesting. It's an interesting juxtaposition, right? Or not really. It's really just two different situations that um, should go the same way,
Yeah.
but don't, but don't.
Yeah. And but what you're saying is like if we go back to that equation, the difference was like the trust, and so
Yeah,
that that somehow changed the potential result, the feelings.
exactly, exactly. Not just the feelings, the approach, right? Because in one of the other situations, I also felt quite hurt,
Mm.
but I was able to transcend the hurt and still get to a place where I cared so much about preserving the relationship that
Mm.
I wasn't reacting, right? I
Mm.
was thinking really deeply about what's really important here. Is it my hurt feelings or is it getting to a place where it's a win-win for both of us, right?
So I want to ask you a question. It's like it's interesting because you've got these two scenarios here, and you said you asked what's really the end goal here, and like where like why do you and were you not able to kind of ask that question for the for you were able to ask it for one, but you weren't able to ask it for the other one?
Great question. Yes, I'm able to ask it for both situations, but in the one situation, I'm I'm immediately ready to go to that place of
Mm.
what's really important here. And in the other situation, I'm so full of my hurt and anger, right?
Yeah.
Not and also I guess at the end of the day, so this is interesting as I talk it through, right? I'm processing it. Thanks for this coaching, Rasha. um, the 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 lack of safety
Mm.
makes makes me less inclined
Yeah.
to go to that place um where I'm more it's more about preserving the relationship. I
Yeah.
guess maybe part of it is I don't I'm not as invested in preserving the relationship
Mm.
because
Yeah.
that trust hasn't been built, and I don't feel like if I come if I
Yeah.
come to it in a positive, magnanimous way, I don't necessarily feel like um, I'm gonna I'm gonna be met with that same energy, right? But with the other person or both people, I have this trust that if I come at it from a place of caring, that I'm going to be met with that same energy. And if I'm not, I have the capacity to forgive that or allow that for the other person.
Well, I've got a question here because, like, this idea of healthy conflict. Yes, we can use it in kind of our personal relationships where we get a choice, to kind of invest in the relationship or not. But also in the world of work, we don't necessarily get a choice. In terms of kind of the people that we work with and we have conflicts with, and you know, you know, I'm gonna like be presumptuous here and say we still want to kind of like have a kind of like a good atmosphere to work in, and so healthy conflict is still a good process to explore. You know,
Yeah, I absolutely, of course. And I think
yeah,
that's an excellent point, that at work you don't get to choose
yeah,
your coworkers, and you don't get to, you know, opt out of relationships even,
that's
because
it.
sometimes you don't have a choice. You've got to have a working relationship with someone. And how healthy and useful and productive is it for you to be in constant conflict with that person, right? So how, I guess the question is, how do you create trust? How do you build trust? How do you create psychological safety, right?
Yeah.
If
Okay.
that's the key, if that's the key to approaching conflict in a healthy, productive way, then how
Yeah.
do you build trust? And how do you build, especially how do you build trust when when it doesn't exist in the first place, right? Or when it's been broken?
And I think there's kind of like long-term solutions and short-term solutions. And I think long-term solutions, let's say like we were working with kind of preventative kind of like volatility, so that it's easier to have the healthy conflict before the damage, the serious damage happens, is in building kind of really working on cultures at work, really building on social interaction and kind of like um making the extra effort into kind of creating bonds within work. That's a long-term strategy. That's kind of like building trust and kind of building culture. But in terms of short-term, like immediate strategy, when the trust isn't there, I think it's kind of working on yourself before, and building yourself up before you have a conversation. So I want to go back to that, to like you said that you were able to immediately go into that mode of, I want to kind of save this relationship while you're in conflict with the second person. But with the first person, you are feeling your feelings. And I think that you need to listen to your feelings. So if you need time out to process your feelings and then come back and kind of like build the conversation, you can do. I mean, I think there are certain stages when you go into a like, let's say you've decided you want to repair with the person that you don't have trust. One thing that you need to do is take the lead. Like you say, you've decided, take the lead, reach out. That's where the courage comes in. And schedule a conversation. But the other bit is to prime yourself before the call. So in positive intelligence land, we call it PQing it up. So listen to your favorite energizing songs, remind yourself of your own power, so you get to control your own space. You don't need anyone's approval or validation or anything, because you provide all of that for yourself. So really kind of doing some, I don't know, 2 minutes of meditation really to just remind yourself of your own power. Because part of the conflict and part of the emotional response is in some way you allowing another person to give you your worth and tell you how you should feel. So definitely PQing up, priming before the call is really important. And then when you start the call and you're all kind of empowered in in yourself, go in with that mind. Go in with that mind of creating psychological safety, acknowledge and appreciate the other person. And as we said, using the language where it's from your own experience, explain your experience rather than anyone else's, rather than theirs. And why that works is because it centers your experience without accusing or.
Rasha, can you share with me again what you were just sharing about conflict?
Yeah, I was talking about how you share, how you want to kind of resolve a conflict. And let's say the trust isn't there, the trust isn't as high on the fader, and you want to make sure that your environment isn't a toxic environment that you're working with. And so I would say the kind of, you've had a conflict situation, the trust isn't there. It's kind of recognizing that you're a leader in any situation. Even if you're not a leader, you are a leader. And you can,
Exactly.
yeah, and you can lead and reach out, be proactive, and that's where you're using the courage.
Right.
And so yeah, so schedule the call, and then before the call, prime yourself.
Mm,
You
mm,
know, be fully in your sage, PQ it up, as we say in positive intelligence. And that's kind of like, I suppose, 2 minutes of like either meditation or listening to your favorite energized song. Remind yourself of your own power. And that
right.
means that you're in control of your emotions. And so, and just remembering that you don't need anyone's approval or anyone's validation or anything, because you can provide that all for yourself. And so when you go in with that energy, there's no, there's you're minimizing the any triggering that could happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's just about like you have this intention of resolving conflict, and not, the intention, I suppose, is not it's a win-win. Basically, you want a win-win out of this.
Right. You're coming into it thinking about what is the ideal outcome, not so
Yes.
much that you want to be right and you want to make sure the other person acknowledges that you're right. Right. What's the ideal outcome? How do you, and this is just credit to Crucial Conversations, right? How do you want everyone walking away from this conversation? And how, I mean, theoretically, you want everyone walking away feeling good, feeling like, I mean, win-win, yes, but also, um,
Yeah, let's define that. Maybe not win-win, but
yeah,
feeling seen and heard and valued.
yeah, yes, and yes, feeling seen and heard and valued, and also walking away feeling like there's a positive future as a result of the resolution, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, I mean, typically that's what we all want going into a conflict. And what happens is we get hijacked or tripped up by our emotions, right? Especially
Yeah.
in these high stakes
Yes.
conversations. So if we're approaching them from a place of how do we get to the result we truly want, we deeply want, the sage part of us wants, right?
Yeah.
Then we're, and if we've pumped up our sage, if we're walking into the situation in that place of wisdom, from that place of wisdom, then we've at least primed the pump.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. And kind of like you're laying the ground as well by kind of like maybe going in, acknowledging the other person for their time, and appreciating them for who they are, even though you might not see things, similarly, still acknowledging them and appreciating them. So it just kind of takes down any barriers that they might have had.
Right, right, right. Exactly. Appreciating them for being there, for showing up, right,
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So like starting off with, first of all, your sage self is in control. And second of all, you're sort of inviting their sage self into the conversation by acknowledging and appreciating. Right.
And yeah, and you just said something really important. Emotions are contagious. So even positive
Hmm.
emotions. So if you come in with positivity and you
Hmm.
stay grounded in that, it is contagious. So you're helping them tear down their walls.
Hmm. Exactly. Exactly. Right.
So you've done all
Right.
that priming. You've done all that priming, which is kind of, being the leader, leading and kind of starting the conversation, priming yourself up, acknowledging and appreciating them. And then you can start the conversation. And when you do
Yeah.
start the conversation, it's talking about your own experience, because that is what is a fact for you. Anything else is not.
Right. So here we are back to how we began this conversation.
Yeah.
So I statements, don't assign intent, right?
Yeah.
Because you're centering your experience without accusing or blaming,
Yeah.
which can help the other person stay open. As soon as you assign intent or blame or attack, the other person ends up getting defensive, or can end up getting defensive, and feel hurt. Their psychological safety is being damaged, and so then you're eroding the possibility of of a healthy conflict
Yeah.
versus a damaging conflict, right?
Yeah.
Now, like you said initially, if if there's a lot of psychological safety, a lot of trust that's been built up in the relationship, then you have that to trade on, right. So it can be that in certain relationships you can screw up, right. You can say something like, I feel attacked, or when you did this, uh it hurt me, and the other person will stay right there with you. But the reality is that a lot of times, if you use that kind of language, which still feels very I centered, right? I felt attacked when you did this. I felt hurt. It's still um, assigning not just intent, but like um, really, it's blaming the other person for your experience.
I don't know. I don't know if it is blaming them, because we haven't gone down into a conversation yet of what you actually want from this conversation, from this. Like, so you could say you might not have meant to do this, but I did. You're basically, this is a moment for boundaries here. And if someone does something, it's got nothing to do with you, but actually it affects you, you have an opportunity to say, to choose, I can't be with this person if they're going to do this. But if I tell them about my boundary, they might want to change.
Hmm. Hmm.
So you
Yes.
so I think it's a little bit I'm just playing a little bit of devil's advocate, but it's like it is your responsibility to say how you felt, and then have the conversation in terms of like of what you would like from them to do next time, like, like create an agreement if that's possible, but also kind of be open the floor for a conversation where you want to hear whether they meant it, or whether it's something that you want to find out about yourself that you need to work on. So you just, you might not be blaming them. So I'm not blaming you for how I felt, but this is how I felt, and I'd like to know, was I making that up? Or or
Yes.
or or, or
Yes.
am I super sensitive and do I need to work on something?
Yes, 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 all of that. So I think that's the difference or the shift, right? rather than I felt attacked, or when you did this, I felt hurt. Um, or maybe not rather than, but in addition to, right?
Mm.
Um, I, I, I don't know if you meant to do this. I don't
Mhm.
know
Yeah.
if this was intentional, but
Yeah.
this is how I received it. So owning your experience, right?
Yeah.
Making sure that you are not accusing them of behaving in a way that they don't necessarily feel like they behaved in, right?
They
Because
might have not even know that you felt that way.
and they not may not be aware of how they came across, or the reality is maybe the third person in the conversation wouldn't have perceived it the way you perceived it, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a third person would
Yeah.
didn't feel like they came
Yeah.
across in any
Yeah.
particular way. So that's something to always be keeping in mind, right? Like are you accusing someone of behaving in a way that is just your perception that they behave?
Perfect. Perfect. And I think that that means the underlying, like when you enter into any conversation, you always have to remember that your reality is not necessarily everybody else's reality.
Exactly. Exactly. And so when you're talking about your reality, being mindful of that and
Yeah.
acknowledging that out loud, because then you're starting with vulnerability also,
Yeah.
right? You're starting with I'm not the know all be all in this situation. This is the experience I had. I want to know, like, am I overreacting? Am I assuming something about how you feel? Share with me your experience, right?
And that's where curiosity, that's what the word curiosity is like,
Nice,
you know,
nice. Yeah,
in the
exactly.
equation. Yeah.
Right, right, right. So share with me your experience, and because I want to know, I'm
Yeah.
curious about what your experience was, and then listening with empathy,
Yeah.
right? Listening
Yeah.
with empathy, hearing what they have to say without thinking about how you're going to respond, or but that wasn't how it felt, or anything about your experience. It's about their experience right now and hearing their experience. And even maybe again, nonviolent communication, reflecting back to them. What I hear you saying is blah blah blah, right? And then they feel seen and heard, and you are clarifying or confirming your perspective of what they're saying to make sure that you're understanding, because maybe there's a whole different thing going on than what you know, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you're about to have your mind blown about that other person's
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. Beautiful, because you're getting the more of the picture now when you kind of enter with that curiosity, with that openness, to listen. Then you get more
Yeah.
of the pieces, and then you build a different picture, and your perspective will hopefully change. And if it doesn't, then you can explore how to create an agreement to work together, to be together, to speak together.
Exactly, exactly. Because that's where where the conclusion starts to come, right?
Yeah.
Starting to talk about agreements, like how do we move forward?
Yeah.
Here's your experience. Here's my experience. We care about each other. We care about how about moving forward together in a way that works for both of us. So what do we want to agree on
Mm.
as we go forward?
Mm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
just before we wrap up, let's just summarize those key points that we're kind of going over as the key points of the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And I think one thing that's something that really stood out for me from this conversation was going in with an open mind and remembering that your perspective is not everyone's. So I would say, like, once you've, you want to resolve, and you want to have a healthy conflict, you want to resolve a situation. Step one, lead with courage, reach out, schedule a conversation. Step two, build your prime yourself up, you know build yourself up, recognize that you're in control of your emotions.
Put yourself
Step,
in safe.
put yourself in stage, yes. Step 3, when you meet up, acknowledge and appreciate the other person. You're creating a foundation for open communication there. Step 4, when you talk, own your experience. Use I statements. Step 5, when they speak, listen with empathy. Step 6, play the conversation out. Use the tools from the nonviolent communication. Mirror what you're hearing. And step 7, conclude with agreements.
Yes. Yes. Perfect. Thank you, Rasha.
Yeah.
Beautiful summary.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Great conversation. Love chatting with you about this stuff.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
we'll be back next week on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Different time zones for different time zones. Thanks everyone for joining us. It's been a pleasure.